What does it mean to live a resilient life? I'm Ryan Mannion. I lost my brother to war and my mom to cancer, and I've learned a lot about myself along the way. Now, as the CEO of Travis Mannion Foundation, I'm on a journey to explore what it means to be resilient against life's many challenges. Join me and some incredible guests as we ask ourselves the hard questions and define what it means to struggle well. All right, so I've got Connor Crehan with me today, and I feel like my Army-Navy rivalry has kicked up a little bit since meeting you the past few years. It's always been there, of course, but I haven't had somebody that I've jarred with as much as you. I did send you, Connor, I think I sent you some eyeballs during the Notre Dame game. You didn't respond. This was like...
Well, that was a multitude of reasons for not responding. Certainly, the game was not going how I anticipated it to go. But also that tailgate started around 12:30 that morning for that 7 o'clock kickoff. So it was a long day, but I would have felt much worse if Navy was able to beat them and we weren't. So at least I took some solace in the fact that it wasn't a close game for either school. And I think I will attribute that to Notre Dame was a lot better than I think people are giving them credit for, given their first game against Northern Illinois. People thought, same old Notre Dame, nice season, but we'll drop a game they shouldn't drop. But I think what they've shown everyone in the last few weeks is that they're just a really good team right now, and they're heating up at the right moment. So, sometimes you run into a team that's better and plays better than you, and you lose, and you got to take the bad with the good. So if that includes getting shit talked by you in the midst of the game, that's the way the cookie crumbles. So be it. I had to endure it.
Listen, I was super conflicted. So I was super conflicted with this game because I am, and I don't know, and I'm curious to know how you stand on this. If Army and Navy are not playing each other, I am going to root for Army. That's not you.
I've never prescribed to that. I know a lot of people say that.
Yeah.
A lot of people like to say, like, for 364 days, we're teammates. It's only one day that we go against each other, and every other day we're on the same team. No thanks. I hope that Navy and Air Force collectively win 0 games every year, and if they get embarrassed in the process, that's fine. Now, what I will say is I think it's great for the sake of the rivalry when both teams are doing well.
Yeah.
I'm sure you have it written there on your notes to bring up the streak that started my freshman year.
It's highlighted
at Army.
right here. Yeah.
Yeah, I figured you did, so I'll just get out ahead of it. When we were going through that streak, that's no fun. That's no fun for either side, I think. I think it kind of lessens the game. And when you hear casual fans, other college football fans talk down about the Army-Navy game because it got so lopsided, that hurts. So the fact that, in the Coach Monken era here in the last 11 years, we've been able to right side that rivalry and certainly in the last 7 years, dominate it on Army side and dominate the CIC for Army. I just think that's better for all parties. So it's a long-winded answer to say that, no, I don't want you guys to win games, but I want you to look semi-respectable and competitive for the sake of our game.
Yeah, I mean, so that was a 14 year winning streak for those that are unfamiliar. 14 years. And I think 2016 is when you guys came back. But I actually agree with you because I was at every one of those 14 games.
Were you?
Yeah, and they got pretty boring. Like,
Yeah,
literally,
exactly.
like, they got where I was like, oh, let's give them one this year. It was like, give one to the, And so I totally agree with that sentiment. And I think that is why there is so much excitement about the game this year.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
I mean, So again, I was very conflicted about, because my dad was like, oh, I want Army to win, like, and I'm like, really? I'm like, I want Army to get smoked there, against Notre Dame. And my dad watched the game with a bunch of West Pointers. Like, he was at a house with all Army guys, all West Point graduates watching the game, and he was like, oh, the mood fell real quick at that game.
Yeah.
But
it would have been a lot more fun if it was going differently.
But what was so exciting is when you looked at the end of that game, it was virtually the same
Identical
game for Navy and Army. So going in, it's like, this game is going to be like a banger to watch them together. And it is very evenly matched, and they're both really good teams.
Yeah, and I think what you've seen since even 2015 is, I don't have the stats in front of me, but off the top of my head, with the exception of, I think you guys beating us in 2019, most of the games have been very close, a lot within one score.
Yeah.
Last year wasn't as close as the score depicted, in my opinion, but it just makes for a more enjoyable watch. And it goes back to, I grew up going to the games in the 90s, and there was a streak in the 90s, and Army won a bunch of those, but there were all a bunch that were within one score, or came down to the last play or some heroic drive on the part of Army at the end. But overall, I will say the other thing about this rivalry getting more competitive again, I run into a lot of Marines and Naval Academy grads. I work with some Naval Academy football players. It gets much easier to stomach being around them when I have a little ammunition to throw back at them, and I can't just sit there and get abused every time I see them. So for all facets, it's just better, I think, for everybody when it's an enjoyable game, especially for those of us that go, considering some of the weather that we've experienced over the years. Nobody wants to sit in a blizzard for a blowout. So overall, I think it's been a great time for Army Navy the last handful of years.
Do you know where the series rests right now?
Navy's up by, I think, 6 or 7 games. You can probably tell me the exact number.
62. Navy has 62 wins. Army has 55 wins.
Yeah,
so, but that gap has closed. And so here were some cool things that I learned that I had no idea. Do you know when the first Army Navy game was? Do you know the year?
1898?
Nope, 1890. You're very close.
Oh, okay.
But here's the coolest part. Do you know that West Point did not have a football team?
Yeah, Dennis Mikey just started one.
Like, literally, it says that Navy had competed as a football team since 1879, so for a year, okay? They challenged Army on what would be the first game in the series, except Army had never played an organized game. But despite that, they accepted. They had home field advantage. The game was played at West Point. Midshipmen won 24-0. But I'm like, how cool is that Army didn't even have a team, and they're like, fuck it, we'll play. Yeah, sure,
we'll play.
Let's go.
We're not going to back down.
Yeah.
We're not going to back down from a challenge. And by the way, as I have my West Point diploma behind me, I really showcased my math skills. I knew this year was the 125th year of the game. Okay. I could have just done some quick math and came up with the answers to that, but I didn't.
Yeah.
I thought about that after the fact.
And the other thing that made me very sad, because this game is being switched around, was that 90 of the 124 games, well, now it'll be 90 of the 125 games, have been played in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And, you know,
we've talked about that.
Yeah.
I would love, and listen, I understand business, commerce, and I understand now why the game moves around and goes out to bid for these cities because of what a revenue driver it is for the city. But I would love if it just stayed in Philadelphia permanently. They do such a great job hosting the game. The decorations are all over the city.
I know.
Philadelphia as a city looks great in December, decorated for Christmas. It's one of those major cities that still has a small town feel to it, in my opinion. This setup for where Philly Stadium is relative to downtown, easy to get in and out. There's just a multitude of reasons why I wish it was just in Philly every year. But alas, we got DC this year, and I've never actually been to this stadium. So I guess I'm looking forward to seeing a new stadium. But I've also heard, I don't know, too many great things about this stadium.
Well, so one of the things that I thought was so interesting as we're putting our tailgate together and, we're dealing different cities. We go into Philadelphia, obviously, when the game's in Philadelphia, it's locked down. Everybody knows what it's going to be. Everybody knows what to expect. We're putting our permits together for the DC game, and we literally had to talk to the cops because they are used to like Commanders games. They're used to big like NFL rivalries. They're used to parking lot fights and this and that. And they're talking to us about the number of people at our tailgate. And, well, we don't know with everything else going on. Like, there's just going to be so much. And we're going to have to have extra police presence when you guys have thousands of people. And I literally had to break it down to them. And I'm like, you guys, like, this crowd is going to be awesome. Like, I'm not saying you're not going to have issues, it's a huge crowd. But, like, for the most part, this is going to be the friendliest rivalry that you've probably ever had at this stadium,
Yeah. Last weekend in college football, there was, I think, 4 or 5 fights between rivals with, teams planting flags on fields and fights and skirmishes after games. I will tell you, beyond a shadow of a doubt, Army-Navy is a better rivalry than every single one of those games, and you would never see any behavior like that after a game, no matter what happened during the game. And trust me, we've played some very hard-fought games, and those guys, they want to win the game, but at the end of the game, they're not going to say, like, all right, let's go over there and try to start a fight. So for those cops to expect anything other than a real easy day, I don't know what else to tell them, but it's going to be a walk in the park compared to what you're dealing with NFL fans and the way they behave sometimes.
Well, so let's talk about that a little. For those that don't know, Connor, you played at West Point. You're on the football team at West Point, and so I'd love to just get a sense from you, like, what it's like. Obviously, the momentum. So the 4 years you're there, how many years do you guys win? 0. Wow. Yeah.
I mean, that bothers me to this day.
Yeah.
It is something that hurts because I can never change it.
Right.
And it's part of the reason why I'm so elated that we've done so well in recent years, not just against Navy, but in general with our football program, because we just didn't have a lot of success when I played. And call it pride, call it competitiveness. That stinks.
Yeah.
When you don't win games. No one goes to a school anywhere and says, like, well, I'm just happy to be here, happy to play football, and that's fun. And if we don't win, who cares? Like, guys care. And that's the reason why you see these older players on both sides of the ball coming back year after year and so invested in these teams, season tickets, traveling all over the country to watch our teams play because it means that much. And I mean, I think the best way to encapsulate how much the game means, and this is not unique to me, but what it really means to everybody on both sides, I can remember distinctly. It's such a memory that's burned in my head. My senior year, losing to Navy, knowing I'd never play football again, knowing I'd never beat Navy, and I sat in my locker and I cried for 45 minutes. Wow. I was inconsolable, and I'm even getting a little emotional now thinking about it, but it becomes such a part of your life for most guys that have been, have played football since they're young guys all through high school, and then most of us aren't going to the NFL. So to know that part of your life is over, that when it's been a massive part, and then knowing how special this rivalry is, it's not like I have to really politic all that much to convince people that Army-Navy is one of, and in my opinion, the best rivalry, not just in college football, but in all of sports.
Yeah.
That's a widely accepted fact. Other people might say, like, some other Ohio State, Michigan, Auburn, Alabama, da-da-da-da-da. But in that top 3 to 5, people always mention Army-Navy. It's still there. So whether you think it's number 1 or number 3 or whatever, it's always mentioned as such a pure rivalry. And when you think about all the men who have played in this game, what they've gone on to accomplish over the course of their lives in history books, some of the people that have played in this game have gone on to do amazing things. The people now who have played in this game who are titans of business, who are massive names in our country and have accomplished so much, to be just a small part of that. And when no one else besides, the two sides can say that, you can't put into words what that means.
Yeah. I mean, didn't go to a service academy, but I've been going to the games since I was young. And I always tell this story. So, we've got this big, massive tailgate now. This tailgate literally started out, we used to go to the Army-Navy game, and we'd go every year, and it was my dad and Alex Gorski, who is a West Point grad. Mm-hmm. And we'd go to the game, and there was 20 people at our tailgate. It was my dad's Marine Corps friends, and it was Alex's friends from West Point. And my dad would bring my brother and I, and Alex and my dad would jokingly, it was this big joke that they had the only true conjoined Army-Navy tailgate, because it was there were 10 West Point grads and 10 Naval Academy and Marine grads. And then my brother went to Navy. And then it was even more and we'd have a Navy flag and a West Point flag. And I remember the first year, Alex's wife decided she was going to get a bartender. And we had this woman show up, and she had a little fold-out table, and she was making Bloody Marys in the parking lot. And it was this is a big deal. Whoa, we've got this really pretty awesome tailgate. And it was actually, and my mom's big thing was Basil Hayden. So the colder the game was, the more shots of Basil Hayden we took before we walked into the game. But the year, it was 2006 that my brother was stationed out in Pendleton and getting ready to leave for his second deployment. And he was like, I think I'm going to try and come back for Army Navy. My mom's like, oh, you absolutely should. And he was like, I'm going to bring some of my friends back from First Recon that you guys have never met. These guys, these two guys, I've created such a tight bond with them. They're my good friends. And he came back that year in 2006, and he brought a guy named Carlo Pecori and a guy named Croft Young. And they were both older than him. Carlo was a Naval Academy grad. Mm-hmm. And so he brought them back, and we spent the whole weekend with them. And of course, when we were there, Alex at the tailgate was loved that there were recent Navy grads there. And it was just, I remember that weekend so vividly, and it was so much fun, and meeting some of Travis's friends. And then he left for Iraq. And I was just having this conversation with Carlo and Croft, those two guys, first time we met them, we still have pictures of all of us at the game. They now serve on our board of directors. They've been on the board of directors at the Travis Manning Foundation since 2007. They're the two that have lasted the longest. Mm-hmm. And Carlo said to me, he's like, imagine if Travis had not brought us back to that Army-Navy game. He's like, of course, we would have showed up at everything. We would have been there when Travis passed, but you wouldn't have known us. We would have been just some Marines that were Travis's friends that would have shared with you how close we were with him, but you wouldn't have known us. And that for me, and again, everybody has their own story of what connects them to Army-Navy. And I know it sounds like hyperbole when I get up there on the stage now at our tailgate and I talk about this is America's game, but you feel that so much. You really feel that when you're there. Just this sense of, and you see all the memes, right? And it's every man on this field is is willing to, I mean, even Portnoy said that when he was on. He's like, what I love is they're all going to go die for us, and but the fact of the matter is it's not bullshit. It's the truth. There's something different about this game. And that's, for me, as a sister of a Naval Academy grad, as a parent of a Naval Academy midshipman, that's what I feel when I show up at this game. So I can only imagine what you're feeling when you're on the field, you know, being a part of the game in that way.
Yes. And then you consider how many of those rivalries across the country does the president come into the locker room before the game and speak to you? I can remember my junior year, President Bush comes in and speaks to us before the game. The presidents, you know, going back to JFK, have attended this game. It matters to the country because in many ways, so many people can connect themselves to the Army or the Navy. So you don't have to try that hard to have an interest in the game.
Yeah.
And I mean, your father didn't go to the Naval Academy, but he felt like he had a connection and wanted to go. And now obviously you have a strong connection directly between your brother and now your daughter, which I think is just, I'm getting emotional thinking about it, but just that passing that torch to your daughter from her uncle must make you just so proud that the name carries on at the Naval Academy, you know, knowing what her uncle did for the country. And I think that's special. And you're not going to find that in other games, where other games it's just football. And it's obviously so much about the football, but it's so much more than that at the same time. And like you said, everybody has a story. And I'm curious, how old were you when you started going to the games? Do you remember your first one?
Young. So again, my dad didn't go to Navy, but all my dad's friends that he went through TBS with, they were all Naval Academy grads. So literally all my dad's Marine Corps buddies were Naval Academy grads. And so we spent and I grew up largely, most of my childhood was spent in the Virginia area, Alexandria. You know, my dad worked at the Pentagon. So we were always in Annapolis. And I don't remember, I have to ask my dad. I don't remember what my first Army Navy game was, but I was young. Like I was definitely young. But then when my dad met Alex Skorsky, my dad and Alex met the year after Alex left active duty, like got out of the Army. My dad was still in, but from there it was like that was their little thing. It was like the Marine and the soldier, you know, and the friendship they created, and so then it got real big. Then there was like that big rivalry happening, and so again, for us, it was always about what that game represented. And I think back to how special that game was for us and when my brother was here, you know, and now what we're doing with it and how we're using it as like a catalyst to introduce, honestly, the rest of the country to how special this game is. And like, you know, our tailgate is about like, I love all the West Point grads and the Navy grads that are there. What I love even more are the TMF Spartans that are just a part of the Travis Manion Foundation that are like, oh, here's a cool event, the Travis Manion Foundation. And they come and they're like, holy crap, this is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, your tailgate is excellent. I've been a handful of times now. You guys have been generous enough to host Barstool's college football show. And it really is now, I would say, one of the flagship tailgates for Army Navy. There's only a handful, maybe 3 that I can think of, 3 or 4 that are there every year and have a massive footprint. So I think that's certainly something to hang your hat on. And the reason I asked, though, about how old you were was I just think it's also special, too, how it can just bond friends and family. Like that's a tradition that you started in your family, and obviously it's morphed into something that's unbelievable. And you know, I don't, obviously most people's tradition of tailgating in Army Navy doesn't turn into a, you know, 2,500 person sponsored tailgate, but nevertheless, you know, they still go every year. And it's just so much fun. And your story is unique in terms of the magnitude it's reached, but I think your story is very similar to hundreds of families who say, we always go to Army Navy,
Yeah.
or we always go to Uncle Bob's house and watch the game at his house. There are a multitude of those stories. And I think when you look at the last 20 or so years, now so many guys and gals have memories of watching the game and finding a way to watch the game in Iraq or Afghanistan. And obviously not the ideal place to be watching the game, but when you take a break from war to watch a game, that's special.
Yeah. Yeah. So when was post-graduation, when was the first time Army came back and won? How many years later?
So I graduated in 06, so then 16, so I had to wait 10 years.
It was 10 years.
11, because my last game was 05. And I just remember in 05, we finished the year playing really well. We had won 4 games in a row, one of which was Air Force, and we were playing well. And then when you start to think, okay, if we beat Navy, we get the Commander-in-Chief's trophy, we get to go to the White House, and the game was tight early on, and then Navy kind of just, I remember one of my buddies, and I won't mention his name because I don't want to embarrass him. He missed the tackle, and Navy scored a touchdown, and it kind of got out of hand from there. It ended up being, I think, 47-23 or something. You would think I would remember it exactly, but I try to block out most of that day. But yeah, and then waiting 10 years. And as you said, in those 10 years, a lot of those games were just lopsided, which was not fun, especially in the Army when your soldiers know that you were on the team. And they're like, sir, what's going on with your team? You kind of stink. And you can't say anything because the proof's in the pudding. And the product on the field wasn't good. So I've said it a few times now, but it's just so grateful that it's gone the other direction. And it really, I think, also adds just to the whole day. All the tailgates are more enjoyable knowing going into the game like this is
gonna be a good
probably
game.
not going to be a blowout. It's going to be a good game.
Yeah. Well, it was funny. A pivotal moment for me was in 2022. I brought my son. He was 8 at the time. And that was the year that it was the first overtime game for Army Navy.
Right, yeah.
And, you know, he was into football, but he was 8 years old. You know, I'm like, this is going to go one of two ways. He's going to get bored or he's going to, but, you know, the game goes into overtime and he's sitting there and my friend's son was there too. And he was also 8. His dad was a Navy SEAL who went to Navy. So they're both, you know, they're sitting there, they've got their Navy jerseys on, and Navy loses. Army kicks a field goal, you know, they win 2017. And I look over and both of them are bawling their eyes out.
Oh.
And it broke. And I was like, oh my gosh, you know, 8 years old. And these 2 little boys are just sitting there crying. And I felt, and for me, I mean, that was a tough loss, but it was also like, what a freaking game, man. Like, this game was awesome. You know, to anybody that doesn't give a shit about Army Navy, like the game itself was an awesome game to watch. It was just a great football game. But I was watching these 2 little boys cry, and I'm like, all right, there it is. Like, he's in, you know? And so...
Yeah, committed.
Yeah,
for life.
He's committed for life. Last year, I didn't take him up to Boston. I'm taking him this year. But he was just like... It was pretty cool to see. And the funny thing is about this year, my daughter turned to me. She's a plebe at Navy, and she goes, ugh, this is going to be the worst Army Navy game ever. And I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, she goes, I can't even go to the tailgate. She has to march on at noon.
Oh, right.
So she's like, this is going to suck. Like, you guys are going to be out there. I'm just sitting in. And I was like, oh man, yeah, that's going to stink. And it's so funny because her boyfriend is a sophomore now at West Point. And last year he was a plebe and he's one of 6 children. His parents drive up, they get tickets to the game. They're all excited. They're up in Boston with us. And I'm like, you got to come to the tailgate. And they're like, we're going to stop by, but we need to see Matthew march on at noon. And I'm like, oh yeah. I'm like, oh. And I turned to Maggie and I was like, babe, just so you know, like, I'm probably never going
I'm
to
not
watch a
going to
March
March
on
on.
like next year. And she was like, I got it, Mom. So his parents are at the tailgate. We're hanging out. And it's like 11:30. And the dad looks at me and goes, yeah, we're not going to the March on. And I'm like, I said, I think Matt's going to be okay with that. But you think about all the different situational experiences that are taking place, like all these parents, right? Like you've got the full brigades marching on at noon, and these kids are sitting there. Like my daughter will be sitting in the stands from 12 o'clock until 3 o'clock.
That's by far the worst thing ever. And I'm not afraid to say it. Thank God I never had to do that.
Yeah.
Because not only do they have to march on at noon, they have to get there for formation. They get there something ridiculous.
I think it was like
10 o'clock in the morning.
I think we dropped her boyfriend off at like 9:30 for formation. Yeah, and they're standing in a big parking lot, you know, just waiting.
Just standing there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh.
So now imagine you stand there for hours, march on, sit there for hours, and then get your butt kicked.
Yeah.
That's not fun.
No.
So I think also too, that probably, I can't confirm this, that probably soured a lot of Army grads going through that streak, because I can't speak for Navy, but at Army, and they've done such a better job with it now. But it used to be there was kind of like this chasm between the Corps and the football team, like, oh, the football team gets treated special. And Coach Monken has done an excellent job of making sure that doesn't exist, where guys are still very much a part of their company down at the Corps, encourages, you know, members of the Corps to come out and support the team in different ways, whether that's joining and becoming a manager or an equipment manager, things of that nature. And when you feel like you are more a part of it, I feel like there's less resentment. And again, going through that streak when you feel like, all right, these guys are already getting special treatment, then they're losing this game every year. Why would I want to go back? Why would I want to root for these guys? And I think that's just natural as an 18 to 22-year-old to feel those sorts of things. So I'm glad that Coach Monken has reverted back to where our guys don't get special treatment. They go through everything just like every other student. Certainly their schedules are adapted to allow for them to do their football responsibilities, but it's just a better situation now. And I think what I've seen from more recent grads is they're very much into the football team, whereas previous grads some years maybe saw it as an obligation and not so much something they enjoyed doing. Yeah.
So there were a couple cool things that I saw. Couple cool facts that I learned. So you probably know this, but this year's game will be only the 5th time both teams have had winning records since 1963.
Oh, since 1963. Okay, that makes sense.
So it was 96, 2010, 2016, and 2017 that both teams entered with winning records. And did you know this? I thought this was pretty cool. Instant replay made its debut at an Army-Navy game. Yeah. That's pretty cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
I did know that.
It was the December 7th, 1963 game in Philadelphia. And
that game is interesting, the 63 game, because I don't know if you were about to talk about what happened right before that.
Well, go ahead.
I mean, that was right before right after the assassination of President Kennedy, and there was a massive debate on whether or not the game would even be played. And I think, ultimately, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think ultimately the conclusion was reached that, President Kennedy was all for sport and competition, and he would want to see this game continue to be played. He attended the game in previous years. So that's where they landed. And then the way the game ended was weird because, Army was about to go in and score, I think it was. And Raleigh Stitchway was our quarterback. And the game was so loud, he couldn't hear what was going on, and we didn't get the final play off before time ran out.
Oh, wow.
Navy won the game. There's YouTube videos of that, and people can go check me on that. And that's the gist of it, though. That had a crazy ending, but the game ultimately almost didn't even get played.
Yeah, it actually, I actually saw that it said that it was actually Jackie Kennedy that made the decision to say this game is going to be played, which I thought was pretty cool. And again, speaks to the significance of what the game was, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, where's the other one that I thought? Oh, the other one that I thought that I saw was cool was that the first football helmet was in 1893, okay,
Mm-hmm.
at an Army-Navy game. And it was Joseph Reeves. He later became an admiral, which that I think is so cool. Like Admiral Reeves is playing in this game and a Navy doctor tells him, if you get another kick to the head, you will have intellectual disability or even death. So he went into Annapolis, went to a shoemaker, and had a shoemaker make him a helmet out of leather. And then this guy goes on to become an admiral. You know what I mean? Like it's this, wonky 18, 19-year-old, and the doctor's like, dude, you're going to die or, be a vegetable if you do not, like, protect your head. And the guy goes on to be an admiral. Like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I mean, that's just one of so many stories.
Yeah.
There's so many stories of what folks who played in the Army or Navy game have gone on to do.
I just had on, and actually the episode's going to release today with, I don't know if you know who Sage Steele is.
Sure, I've met Sage before. Yeah,
so,
and I know her father just because we have a golf tournament every year. Army Football Club is our Letterman's club. So I've met him. I don't think he would know me by name, but I've had the pleasure of meeting him before.
First West Point black football player. And she said he didn't really, like, she said he never talked about it like I was the first black. He was just like, I played football at West Point. But she said the picture of the football team that year, she's like, my dad is like, there's dad. Like, you don't have to search at all. And we actually found the picture after we got off the episode with her. And it was just like, that's so freaking cool, And
I'll tell you, watching him interact with his classmates and teammates, there's no race there, right? It's just, these are my teammates. Right. These are my guys that I played with. And that's why he never mentioned it, because he didn't care. He never saw that. And certainly went on to serve in the Army, which is a very diverse group of men and women. So that's not surprising to hear that he didn't really ever mention, I was the first black.
She said it wasn't until she was older in her career at ESPN. Like, she always knew her dad played football at West Point. But she was like, I literally was an adult when it came out. And I was like, wait, Dad, you were the first black football player? He was like, oh, yeah. She's like, how did we not know that,
And not just that, he was an exceptional player. He was very good and an exceptional athlete. I think he was on the track team as well. I'm pretty sure he's in our Hall of Fame, our Army football or Army Athletic Hall of Fame.
That's awesome.
So he wasn't like a charity case, like, we'll put this guy on the team because he's tall. Like, no, he was a legitimate player.
All right, I have two questions left for you. The one is just about how you feel. So I have three questions.
Okay.
As a spectator, not a player, what outside of the actual game itself, what is your favorite part of that day?
Wow. It's probably running into old teammates that I don't talk to regularly, who I didn't know would be there. But then I embrace and we see each other and, have a beer, and it's like no time has passed. And getting to see people that you spent pretty much every day with for 4 years, and knowing that they're doing well in their lives, and just getting to spend time with them. And it's almost like Christmas. You don't know what you're going to get. You go to the game and you don't know who you're going to see, but you're going to see some people.
Yeah.
And it's just great. And I get so excited when I turn a corner at a tailgate or somebody emerges from a crowd. It's like, oh, I didn't know you were going to be here.
Yeah.
And it's just, it is a lot of fun.
Big family reunion for sure.
Yeah.
So my favorite part of the game, outside of the game actually being played, is watching the two teams sing the alma mater,
Yeah.
And that leads into my second question, which is, and again, you had to sing first for 4 years, which is a tough thing. But do you remember the emotion you felt when you were facing your classmates and singing that song? Because I literally get emotional every year when I watch these teams sing the alma mater.
Yeah, and I'm pulling up a picture. I'm gonna text it to you right now. Like, this is how crazy I am. I have a picture of myself singing that alma mater my senior year, and I was crying.
Yeah.
Because that's when it started. I
Yeah.
knew, like, this is it. I'm never gonna get another chance, and this is the worst day of my life, and I don't know what to do except cry. And at that point in my life, I've become more emotional as I've gotten older. I'm 40 years old now. I'm making it sound like, talking to how much I'm crying and making it sound to you listeners like I cry every day. But back then it wasn't something I did a lot. So yeah, it was just the hardest thing. I remember feeling like I let everybody down, and I was a backup quarterback, and I played on special teams. So it's not like I threw the interception that lost us the game or something of that nature. But certainly you feel the weight of your teammates and the core, and you couldn't get it done. It was just a really, really horrible feeling.
Yeah. All right, we're going to use that picture, though. You got to send that over to me.
That's fine. That's fine.
And my last question is, obviously I know who you think is going to win this year, but I'd love to hear a score prediction from you.
Wow. That's tough. And actually, I'm going to send it to you, these pictures, by the way, right now, because I want to get your reaction to them.
Okay.
So hopefully you have your phone handy.
I do.
I think the score will be 21-3 in favor of Army. I think our defense is incredibly stout this year.
21-3. Whoa.
Yes. I think we're due for a game that is not close. And I say this every year because I just want it to be not close. Because sitting there for these close games, it puts knots in my stomach. And that has been the great thing about every game, with the exception of Notre Dame and our most recent game against UTSA. Every game has been in hand for Army pretty early on. So it's been an enjoyable viewing experience just as a fan watching football. I don't love how agonizing it is watching the game when it's back and forth, and one play can really just turn the game on its head. Like a couple of years ago, you talk about that overtime game when we blocked the punt and scored the touchdown. That kind of changed the momentum of everything. Or last year when we stripped Navy's quarterback and ran it back for a touchdown, and we knew, like, okay, I think we're going to win this. So I'm hopeful that 21-3 is the score. And I just think Bryson Daly, our quarterback, and our outstanding offensive line, just going to cap a great season by beating Navy, getting the CIC again, and keeping it there at West Point.
I think that's an ambitious score. I haven't put my prediction out, but I'm going to do it right here. I believe it is going to be a close game. I think these two teams are very evenly matched this year. But I am going with 21-17 Navy is my score prediction, which is a bit of a high-scoring game for an Army-Navy game because historically, but we're passing the ball pretty well. I think we're going to come out with the big win. I'm looking at this picture of you, and I feel like your face right here is the face that I see when I'm looking at that screen and I'm watching these young men and the team that's not winning. And you know what? Even the team that does win, they're all so emotional, and especially the seniors. And your face looks like a face I've seen for many, many years. And that encapsulates what this game means and how special it is. So, yeah, that may be the cover photo when we put a reel out.
I would understand why. But it's weird, right? Like, that's not a happy memory, but for some reason I have that picture saved.
Yeah.
I don't know. Makes sense to that. I think that just, again, is another reason it speaks to, even though the outcome wasn't what I wanted, it still signified something that was so important to me, something that I carry with me to this day, and something that I'm immensely proud of, to say that I was an Army football player.
Yeah.
So even though it's not the outcome I wanted, I'll still always share that picture or keep that picture for myself.
I love it. I am looking forward to this year. We've got not too long to go, days to go until this matchup takes place. It's going to be a good year.
Yes.
Thanks, Connor.
Yes. Thanks so much, Ryan. Always great to be with you.
You too.